We welcome Jenna Ellis back to Next for the first time in your role as a senior legal advisor to President Trump's re-election campaign. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me. It's so great to be back in Colorado.
I imagine nice to get out of D.C.
Yes.
Let me ask you about President Trump's prospects for winning Colorado. So his net approval in Colorado has gone down 11 points since he was elected. He's about 10 points underwater in approval here now. How does he convince more Coloradans that he deserves re-election?
Well, I think Colorado is a very competitive state, and Brad Parscale, our campaign manager, is also very convinced of that. And I think that if you see the overall national approval rating, he's just continuing to grow there. And for people in Colorado, I think conservatives especially are really excited and enthusiastic that he's actually coming back to Colorado tomorrow for the rally. And that's going to be a really special time for him to talk about his accomplishments directly to how that impacts Colorado as well. And I think, of course, getting out the vote is really important for a lot of people in 2016 who may have stayed home or just didn't think that the election was as important as it is now. I think that they're seeing with how much Colorado has shifted. We lost, of course, the Senate majority in the last election there. I think that conservatives in Colorado are really recognizing when they hadn't before how much it's so important to not only have the ground game here but also on the national level. And we're seeing just widespread support throughout Colorado for the president.
I think there's certainly an anger and a backlash from Colorado conservatives who are upset about the fact that Democrats have more control over this state at any point than they have in the last 80 years.
Yes.
That will translate probably to base turnout. Does that then translate to turning out unaffiliated? It's now the largest group in Colorado politically. How does the president reach those folks?
I think he does, and we're seeing actually that the demographics of people who attend the rallies, there are a lot of people who are who hadn't voted in the last election they're coming, or even registered Democrats. We look at New Hampshire, 24% who attended the rally were actually registered Democrats, and we have a whole movement, Democrats for Trump, who are very disenfranchised by the candidates that are running in their party, and they're saying they don't represent our values, they don't represent America's values. And so for President Trump, we're seeing that there is, again, a nationwide movement. I think here in Colorado, it also reflects that some people that aren't as progressive as people like Jared Polis are saying we cannot let Colorado go as far as the liberal wing wants it to with, of course, abortion, with family values, with just the rights of conservatives and of the individual citizens to freely exercise their sincerely held beliefs. We've seen what happened in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case. Colorado is really a test ground, and I think President Trump speaks very clearly to people in Colorado, especially people that aren't affiliated, to see that he stays so within the margins of the Constitution, and he truly, as president, represents all Americans, not just his base.
I imagine some folks will quibble with that, but I want to talk about some other topics. Republican Senator Cory Gardner.
You're welcome to tweet at me anytime.
Sure. Republican Senator Cory Gardner. He's been an unwavering ally of the president. Was there ever any doubt on Team Trump that that's where Gardner would be at the end of the day? There's a lot of chatter in Colorado.
Not at all. I think that there was a lot of chatter among people here and people who were just concerned overall, what the vote would be. But, Cory has absolutely been 100% with this president. And of course, when you look at what actually happened in impeachment, we called it the impeachment hoax, and that's really what it was, because any just sincere, reasonable, rational person would see that those articles of impeachment were not only legally and constitutionally flawed, but it was an all-out witch hunt against the president. And so it should have been actually a higher vote than it was. And I think that is the unfortunate weaponizing and politicizing of a system when we see that people are party line voting rather than voting actually for the Constitution. But of course, I don't think there was ever any doubt that Cory was firmly behind the president as well as the Constitution.
Do you expect further legal challenges from Democrats and their allies? You're going to be staying in a job even if there's no impeachment.
100%, unfortunately. And that's just because the Democrats really have no other game plan or platform. Look, they have such an identity crisis within their own party. The failing New York Times can't even decide who it wants to get behind in terms of a candidate. They have no candidate. They have no message. They don't even have a good registration system in terms of coming out of Iowa caucus and everything, exactly how they're even going about their own elections. So this is really their campaign, is to simply target and harass President Trump. And I don't think that that's going to stop anytime soon, unfortunately. But that's where I think the tenor over America is that the Americans who really care about the economy, care about jobs, care about things that impact us daily, they see what this president is doing for the average American, for minorities, for all of us. And they're tired of what the Democrats are doing by weaponizing the system. And I think that that's really hurting them, and that's going to be very favorable to the president going into 2020.
Do you think that there are Coloradans and Americans generally who don't care for the president personally, but will just vote simply on the strength of the economy?
Probably, and I think that that's one of the wonderful designs in our Constitution is that we, the voter, get to decide what matters to us. And that's why, President Trump listed in his State of the Union address all of his accomplishments, and that spoke to everyone. I mean, what matters to you most significantly might be something that differs from what matters to me and my family, but at the same time, that's why our founders said it's a pursuit of happiness, right? And it's the right to freely self-govern, and that's why President Trump is giving power back to the people so that we can have such a diversity in our union and say that there are things that matter to us individually that he's directly speaking to. And so even we're seeing, like Democrats for Trump, even people who aren't necessarily affiliated with this party, much less necessarily agree with absolutely everything he says, they are still so strongly behind this president because they see what he's doing for America.
And last night in Denver, Rod Blagojevich coins the term Trumpocrat, which may stick. So I know you're on the campaign side legally, but your background is in constitutional law, and currently the Trump administration is challenging the Affordable Care Act. It's a case out of Texas. It's not going to be decided likely until after the election. But if the Trump administration is successful, that would likely strike down protections for folks with pre-existing conditions. Do you think as a matter of either good politics or good law that it's incumbent upon the president to outline how people with pre-existing conditions would be protected if that happens?
Well, I'm not going to get ahead of the White House or certainly not speak to them and, for them and their policy. I'm on the campaign side and, represent him in a direct capacity. And so I think that those decisions will be made as those things come. But I think that challenge is certainly constitutionally significant, and I fully support what the president is doing there. And I think from a constitutional standpoint, if we look again at what the federal government is allowed to do, what the state government is allowed to do within the margins of the Constitution, that's where those challenges are arising from, and that's to make sure to protect and preserve the unalienable rights that were given by God our Creator, not our government. And again, that's just one other instance where President Trump is returning the power back to the people.
Another constitutional law question. What did you think when you heard him say last week that he has the right to meddle in cases at the Department of Justice?
Well, he didn't say that. So he said he has the legal right to comment on it and to get involved if he chooses, and he hasn't yet. He is the chief law enforcement officer. He has Article 2 authority, absolutely. And it's actually Attorney General Barr's not only right but obligation to make sure that justice is served. And when you see that there are prosecutors that are completely ignoring any of the directives from the Department of Justice, they're having these just such excessive sentences that are politically targeted and are politically motivated cases that are tantamount to malicious prosecutions, absolutely it's the obligation of the Attorney General to step in. And if President Trump wanted to direct the Attorney General, which he said he hasn't, there's certainly evidence to show that that was already in process before he tweeted. As a private citizen, he can certainly comment on that, and as the President, the Attorney General serves at his pleasure, and so he absolutely has the legal right to do that as well.
Right down to making suggestions or comments on individual cases.
Absolutely.
So I just want to follow up on that. As somebody who is concerned about the weight of government in people's lives, do you have any concern about a situation where the president directs individual criminal cases against people?
Well, we see that even with his presidential power of pardon and clemency, right? I mean, there are specific instances that are outlined in the Constitution that provide the president with specific authority on individual cases.
Back-end remedies, not front-end remedies.
Back-end, but at the same time, when you have the Department of Justice, which is the chief law enforcement agency of the country, the obligation and the oath is to do whatsoever justice requires, and that is no different on the Department of Justice scale than it is in the DA's office. When I was here in Colorado as a prosecutor, and my client was justice, and to do whatsoever justice requires, not to look at the political partisanship or a D or an R after the defendant's name, but to make sure that justice is served. And so where the president, I don't think that it was in any way an accident that our founders provided that a citizen would have that authority of commander-in-chief and chief law enforcement abilities, because sometimes they can see outside of some of those political parameters that maybe a sitting attorney or someone in the military, for example, of being the chief, the commander-in-chief, they would see something that maybe someone in that position wouldn't. And so he absolutely has all Article 2 authority, and it specifically says, Article 2, Section 1, all executive authorities vested in a president of the United States.
Last question, kind of on a more personal level. I know that I personally have benefited greatly in my career when colleagues have taken me aside and been like, hey, you don't want to do it like that. Or this thing you said, that really was the wrong thing to say. And working for the president, is he interested in feedback like that? Do you see him recalibrate his approach based on feedback like that?
Oh, he asks for opinions all the time. I mean, he calls me up all the time and asks opinions on things, and he is just the most kind and genuine person. And I think he does take that feedback very seriously. And I think, whether or not he modifies his behavior accordingly, all we can do is suggest, and we all serve at the pleasure of the president. And his decisions, he's the one with the elected capacity. And but I think that he does take very seriously those around him, what their opinions are. And I've seen him just be such a wonderful person in terms of reaching out to a lot of different people, asking a lot of different opinions on himself and on a lot of other things that he's responsible for. And I've come to sincerely respect him, not just from an outside person being a supporter, but also now working and getting to know him personally and working with him directly. I have so much respect for him as a person and how he runs that office.
Jenna Ellis, welcome back to Colorado. Enjoy your time here. Big rally tomorrow. I'm sure you're going to enjoy that. Come back.
Thank you so much, Kyle.
Subscribe to the Next YouTube channel for the best of Next and some other stuff.